My name is Kathy Simpson. I'm the Deputy CEO at the library, and I'd like to thank you for coming out, braving the weather, to support local history, local heritage, and your local public library. Just a few housekeeping things before we get started. The Heritage House is open for if you need to use the washroom. It's just in the back door and to your left. Helen says there's also the outhouse if you want to break that. She also mentioned, it's interesting, I guess this is the girls' side of the schoolhouse and this is the boys' side, and you pretty much divided yourselves up nicely. And you will have a chance to use the washroom in between speakers, so we'll have quick breaks. So I thank you for coming out. I'd also like to thank the museum director, Helen Ruth, for partnering with us again this year and allowing us to hold the talks in this beautiful historic setting. Thanks also to the Town of Lincoln's Heritage Committee, who helped us organize the talks and has joined us here this morning. Our theme this year is Heritage Properties, and we'll feature 4 houses, 2 cemeteries, 1 library/Masonic hall, 1 church, and 1 smokehouse. And all these have been deemed of historic, architectural, and cultural value under the Ontario Heritage Act. So it is a lot of heritage to cover, and so we're trying a little something different this year. Instead of 1 speaker each Saturday, we've got 8 different speakers lined up. 4 will talk this Saturday, and 4 are scheduled for next Saturday. Same time, same place. So we hope to see you out next Saturday as well. Each speaker will speak for about 15 minutes, and we'll have a quick question and answer period. It's a tight schedule, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ms. Amanda Bauhofer, Chair of the Heritage Committee, who will say a few words about the designation process.
Yeah, all right, okay. So my name is Amanda Bauhofer, as mentioned earlier, and I am the chair of the Town of Lincoln Heritage Committee. Who even knew we had a Heritage Committee in Lincoln? Put up show of hands. That's great. You know, I think that I became chair about, 4 or 5 years ago. And I think that one of the things we really wanted to do was to try and get the people of Lincoln a little bit aware of what we do, because there are a lot of hidden gems in Lincoln. And by hidden gems, I mean properties like this, like the one we're sitting in, like the properties of the speakers who are going to be speaking today. And there are lots of these places that are exceptional. They have a lot of architectural value, historical value, and even cultural value to the town of Lincoln. We've got a lot of ancestry here that has brought a lot to the place. And I think it sort of displays it in the buildings, in the properties, and things like that. So I'm just going to go over a little bit about the process. Just in case any of these speakers here, if they're going to talk about, as was mentioned earlier, homes, cemeteries, schoolhouses. So I think that if there's any buildings that you, or trees, or cemeteries, or anything like that, that you think have historical value to the town of Lincoln, hopefully you will then bring them forward to us. And it's really easy to contact us. You just call the town and say, hey, I have a piece of property that I think has some historical or heritage significance, and they'll get you in contact with us. So I just really want to go through the process to start off, and just to let you know how it happens. So normally, there's 8 or 10 of us on the committee, and a lot of us have been living in the committee for quite a few years, living in the town for quite a few years, and so we know where the hidden gems are, but we can't necessarily always go knocking on doors and saying, hey, we think you have a really cool place, would you like to designate it? Sometimes it takes people coming to us, and so that's a little bit what this is about, letting people know that you can come to us. There's application form that you can fill out, bringing forward any history of the building or anything like that. And then we basically go on a site visit, and we've got some really great experts on our committee with regards to history of the places or architecture. You bring forward your application, we do a site visit, and then we review it, and then we start the process. And the process really is going through and tabling a lot of information. We write reports, That gets brought forward to the town council, and then it's approved, and then there's a few more sort of legal steps involved. And then the information gets put onto the deed of the property. And so that all seems really simple. The whole process takes about a year when we're, in contact with you and things like that. And then that happens, and then you think, then what? So then we have a designation ceremony, and afterwards, I'd like, if you have time, if you can go to this table here, you'll see the plaque that we put on the places. On Anya's house right here, there's a little plaque sitting right between the two doors there. And so we have a plaquing ceremony, and then what's next? Then people think, okay, so 10 years later, or 5 years later, 2 years later, and I want to restore my windows. What's going to happen? Are they going to allow us to restore the windows as if the home is already designated? Well, of course we are. It's really important that the properties that are of heritage and historical significance stay standing and well loved. So if somebody has a historical or a heritage property and they want to make some renovations, yes, of course we'll allow that. That's a lot of the stumbling block when people think about, not wanting to designate their property. But we do. We work with the people. We've got some great experts. If, for example, your staircase is amazing and that has been designated, and you want to rip out the staircase, yeah, we may sort of say, really, you have to rip out the staircase. Is there any way we can renovate it? But if you want to do brand new windows because you want to keep the house a lot warmer, a lot more intact, of course you can. We'll work with you. We would just like to hear what your renovations, your major renovations are, but we're not here to stop you because we think it's really important that these prime gems of property stay intact. And so if it means putting up new windows, anything like that, we will be for it, but we would just like to know about it. So as you go through and you hear all the great tales and all the great stories about the properties that are designated, just think about this. If there's any property, if there's any tree, 400-year-old oak tree perhaps, an old tree, we've got some great oak trees in town. If there's a vista, if there's a property that that has some great historical merit or heritage, if there's a cemetery, if there is a barn, if there's a smokehouse, if there's anything like that that you think has great merit to the town of Lincoln, then please give us a call. We have a lot of hidden gems, so I'd like you guys to help us find them. So that's a bit about the process. Any questions? But yes, go ahead. Yes, sorry.
Is there a year? Is it 100 years or?
No, there isn't. It's sometimes, we're even looking at, war style homes, that kind of thing. If there are, and so there really isn't 100 years old or something like that, because there's a whole bunch of factors that take into account to make a home a heritage property. So.
If somebody gets designated as a heritage home and then they go to sell it, and the new buyer says, well, yeah, I like it, but I don't want a heritage home. I like everything else about it, but I would want to do enough renovations. Can it be de-designated, undesignated?
It can.
Or is it permanent?
It's not an easy process. It can be de-designated. But we find that some people want, if the home is designated, it is a valuable, it's an asset. So, I think the right buyer would come along. But it can be, but, we don't, promote it. It can be. Yes, that's a short answer. Yes?
The whole property or just parts of the property?
I'm sorry?
Is the whole property designated or just parts of it?
It can just be parts.
So you mentioned the staircase, so you could have a whole house and only the staircase is designated?
Yeah, and then, if it's a staircase, then it's usually the floors and floorboards and bits and, bits and bobs and things like that. Yeah.
So is there something about the house that is culturally important, historically
Yes.
important, and maybe the walls aren't, and you can redo the walls for the long as you...
Exactly. And again, we just need to have that kind of dialogue. So I'm going to have Anya Humphrey come up and discuss her property. And again, afterwards, I'm going to be here. So if anyone has any questions, or if it triggers any thoughts about any places you'd like to bring forward to us, I'll be here. So I can hand off to Anya.
Good morning.
Good morning.
First of all, I should explain my name. My legal name is Nancy. I've gone by Anya for 45 years, and I usually prefer that. that, but a lot of you know me as Nancy, and it's just one of those confusing things in life. I'm sorry. I need to begin by saying that in 2006, I think, my husband was working on a library board with some of the folks who are here today, and was approached and asked if we would designate our house, and we started that process, and very soon afterwards he was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and has since died. And I obviously cry easily. I can't talk about my house without talking about him and about our life there. Please bear with me if I cry. That's what I do, and I will be okay. And I guess I want to say what an interesting parallel it is for me, that, you know, one of the major challenges of owning an old house is that you have to balance the need to preserve and honor the past while at the same time really engaging in a kind of a productive way with the present. And that's what my life is about now. So I can't really talk about the house without kind of spilling my whole history with you. And I guess that's just the way life works. So I kind of appreciate my house for being like a venue for me to do my grief work. And that's kind of what's happened. So having said all of that, I would also like to say that we would never have been able to own our house if it weren't for my husband's ability to teach himself anything. You know, those of you who own old houses know that you can't own an old house without having a stepladder set up. And Fred learned to do wiring and plumbing and pump repair and carpentry and plastering and you just, everything, all those trades, you know, either you have to be independently wealthy or you have to learn how to do them yourself. So much of what you see was done by my husband, and I think he did a really wonderful job. So, the front of the house, when we bought it, there was no gingerbread on the porch, and there were just 4x4 posts. And as one of the terms of our mortgage, we had to rebuild the front porch, which was falling apart. So that had to be done immediately, and we were out there with, you know, as total novices, trying to figure out how to do this. And Camden is a wonderful town that way. Neighbors came by and said, "Would you like to try this?" You know, to help us figure out how to jack things up. And one of our neighbors, our neighbor across the street, Jean Smith, the late Jean Smith, came over one day and said, "Would you be interested in the gingerbread that used to be on your porch?" And we said, yes we would. She had seen a previous owner throwing it in the garbage, and she had rescued a piece of it and had it in her possession. And as fate would have it, also owned a woodworking shop. So she made all the gingerbread that you see. Oh, that's another. That's the side. But I think we'll get to a little bit better picture of the gingerbread. She made it with her son, all of it from the original pattern. Isn't that amazing? Very amazing.
Oh, great.
Yeah. He was doing an exquisite job. One of the things that people always ask us about our house is, why does it have 2 front doors? And I don't think we know for sure why it does. It doesn't seem to have ever been intended to be a duplex. One of the reasons that we've heard of why people would have 2 front doors is that in some cultures, the door that is at the top of the steps there would be the one that you would use generally to go in and out of the house, but the other door is the one that you would leave when you were dead, that your body would be carried out by that door. So that may be the case. It also seems to have been a commonly done thing that elderly parents would live with the family who were basically the homeowners, and the older folks would have one door as their door so that they could have their parlor and their visitors that were separate from the rest of the family. That's also a possibility. And we do know that at different times the house was divided up in interesting ways. There are doors everywhere, so of course it's very easy to reconfigure. And in fact, there are at least 3 people here today who lived in our house a long time before we did. So, you know, they would be wonderful resources about how it was divided up then. All right, let me see here. Oh, one of the people that's given me information about our house is Dorothy Parr. Some of you may know Dorothy. She died some years ago, but she owned one of the old boys reunion books from the church and gave us a copy, which I brought with me. It has a picture of our house in it. And Dorothy's given us a lot of information about when her either mother or grandmother lived in the house. There's also a picture hanging nail that I brought that Dorothy gave me that had been used there. It's a kind of nail where the head unscrews from the nail so that you can pound the nail in and then screw this beautiful decorative head on and hang a painting from that. Yeah. Okay. I've got a few side views of the house. The pattern of bricklaying is, let's see, the Heritage Committee told us about this. On the front and the two sides is called Monk Bond, and on the back it's called 6-course Flemish header, which would be there. That's the back. So yeah, it's a little bit different pattern from the front, perhaps easier to lay. So there'd be the fancy sides and the boring sides. I think I'm going to just take you into the house and show you parts of it. This is, as you come in the front door, this room is the room we use as a dining room. I guess according to the Heritage Committee, it wouldn't have necessarily been a dining room, but it would have certainly been where the family ate. And we have taken the wallpaper off of probably every room in the house. I don't think there was a single room that had ever been painted before we came, so that there was bare plaster everywhere. I have brought some of the pieces of wallpaper with me as well. They're a little bit hard to see, and I haven't soaked them because, of course, that changes the color. But some of the colors are amazing, and you can get a sense of what the original wallpaper might have been like. We took the wallpaper off of this room some years ago, and we tried to get the polystipple off the ceiling, which uncovered a kind of a pink, powdery, or I guess it had been painted pink. And then we got stalled, so I haven't decided what else to do with that room. I know that part of what had happened is that there was a fire in that house at one time. I gather it was a second floor wood stove that, I don't know exactly what happened to cause the fire, but there are a few places where floorboards were replaced and where the plaster has clearly been repaired that seemed to have been a result of a small fire. When we bought the house, every single square inch of woodwork had been painted high gloss white.
Oh,
Everything. There wasn't one single tiny millimeter that wasn't high gloss white. And having young children and knowing about the dangers of lead in paint, we just felt that stripping it would be a terrible mistake and not historically accurate either. People didn't paint or didn't generally varnish woodwork in the days when this house was built in, I think, about 1870. So there are still large areas of the house that aren't white because we just couldn't cope with it all, but we have painted the woodwork in a number of rooms and tried to use colors that were appropriate for the time. There are several actually brands of paint now that try to mimic old colors. So this is a work in progress. This is what we use as a living room, so that the second front door is basically right beside the two photographs that you see there. There's still polystipple on this ceiling. We haven't been able to go over that. I think I'll have you go to the next slide. The woodwork in the living room is just beautiful. The wood goes all the way to the floor, as you can see. All the windows in the house are kind of what made us want to buy it. They're so big and beautiful, and they're all original windows. There are clearly some panes that have been replaced, and you can tell very clearly which ones of those are because the old panes have that wonderful ripply quality. That's the way the baseboards look next to this window. They're quite high. They are the fancy baseboards in the house. The rest of the house has a much smaller, less decorative kind of baseboard. This is the front door, and as you can see, it has panels that I just love the panels, so I paint them sometimes alternate colors just so that they stand out more. Okay. And this is coming into the kitchen. We spent about 25 years thinking about how on earth we could renovate a kitchen so that it would still have the features of the old house, but we could live in it. So finally, when we did that, we decided we had to build in a little bit of covered space, but we tried to leave the wainscoting uncovered as much as possible because it's just so beautiful. This is the west wall of the kitchen. The red that you see kind of in the middle is all original wood, and the area that's I think you can see which parts, the left-hand red part is vertical bead board and the right-hand side is horizontal. The left-hand side would have been in a cupboard. And when we took what had been there off, you could see different colors of paint where the shelves in the cupboard had been. And then the part to the right is a backsplash where they apparently had a dry sink. So we moved the sink over, we put in a new sink obviously, but we moved that over to use the original backsplash. And you might be able to tell that we actually have a faucet that looks kind of like a pump. That was me just wondering. These cupboards were in the basement and were being used more or less as garbage. And we thought we were kind of, you know, people who would be aware of antiques, but I guess we were just clueless because we just kept on using them more or less as garbage. They had motors in them and stuff like that. And when we decided to do the kitchen, some friends who were acquainted with Barclay Holmes, the late antique dealer in Lincoln, said, well, get Barclay to come out and look at it. He'll tell you whether they're old. So we dragged Barclay down to the basement and he looked at the lower one and said, oh yes, this is a jam cupboard. That's a wonderful little cupboard. That would have been made probably for this house. You should use that. The bottom was completely rotted out because our basement is brick and dirt. So my husband actually had to cut the whole bottom off and create a new base for it, but that was fine. Anyway, Barclay turned around and saw this other cupboard in the basement, which was upside down, painted flat paint, you can see it there, and had modern handles on it. And Barclay looked at that for a moment and said, oh dear. And we said, oh dear. And he said, oh dear. Oh dear. That cupboard is from Vineland. He knew the name of the manufacturer. And he said, the top, which was on the ground, was completely and utterly rotted out. And I mean, it looked so stupid. We just couldn't believe that that cupboard was worth anything. But he said, I have a buyer that would give you $2,000 for that in its present condition. And we said, oh dear. So you can just go to the next slide. Fred had a friend who was able to put apparently quite authentic looking crown molding on the cupboard, and of course we used it. I should have taken a close-up. At the bottom of the right-hand door, there's an adorable little mouse hole when we left. And I mean, we were just horrified that we hadn't really taken advantage of this before. I guess do I still have a few minutes? Okay. Yeah. Anyway, we decided we had to use the cupboard, of course, and it sort of was a mark of the way a lot of people think about old houses, that when we got our handyman who helped us with the kitchen and showed him this cupboard, he said, Anya, you're going to sell that cupboard and you're going to rip out all this wood and we're going to redo it and make it look just like it used to look. And I said, no, Hank, you don't understand. You know, we don't want it to look like it used to look. We want it to be what it used to be. And when you have an old cupboard that came with the house, you use the cupboard. You don't sell it and buy a different cupboard. So it took Hank a long time to grasp what we had in mind, but finally we got there. This is upstairs. This is the master bedroom, which you can kind of see there's a closet that's been built in on the left there. I probably didn't, I might go to the next photograph, you might be able to see. You can't see it very well. This is, of course, the window that's at the center of the house, and there's a wall here. It's kind of an L-shaped wall that now encloses the staircase, which I guess was always open, so that this wasn't really a room that you could have closed originally, and somebody put that wall in so that you could close it. We know that in houses of this general style, the ladies would have come up the stairs, which would have normally had a railing all around it, and sat by the window to sew in the afternoon or whatever. So we think that the builder kind of changed his mind at some point with this house, because it was never like that. There's no indication that there was ever a wall that would have made a separate room that window wouldn't have been part of. Go ahead, Kathy. I took a picture of the way the floorboards are, because, you know, the floorboards all come together in places. Normally, I think they would have put a wall where they butted the boards like that, but it takes a serious jog in our room, and we don't know. It's different now. Okay. This is a room that I have just actually redone. It was our daughter's room when she was little, and then it was our youngest son's room. I purposely didn't show you pictures of the way it used to be. We allowed them to paint on the walls as teenagers, and it was kind of funky and interesting, and it was a little hard to say goodbye to it, but you know what? We were done with that. So it's now our guest room, and there's a little bit of a feel, I think, of what the rooms were like. Okay. I took a picture of the floorboards butted together there too, because it's on the other side of the stairwell, and who knows if they just changed our minds. We're now going out of the kitchen into the summer kitchen. The summer kitchen and what is essentially a drive shed are part of a board and batten structure at the back of our house. It's not brick structure, it's different. And we'll just go through the door and you'll see the fireplace. People in town have told us that they used to roast whole pigs in our fireplace, which is certainly possible, as well as that it has no damper, so we always joke that Santa Claus would have no trouble at all getting into our house. That's looking up at the ceiling. We took this beam here used to have the ceiling attached to it, and we took that ceiling out because it was very low and unpleasant. So we put a skylight in that room, and what you see is the ceiling now. But over the room, it wasn't even really a crawl space. It was just nothing. In the fireplace, I think I have 2 pictures of this. Keep going. There's hook for a pot. I think I have one more that's a little better lit. Anyway, there is definitely a hook that you can hang a pot from. And then we'll continue on into the area past that. You'll keep going, Kathy. What's happening there?
That seems to be the end of it.
How bizarre. I know I sent you about 6 more photos. I don't know what happened there, because when I tried to print them out this morning, my print kitchen, we didn't notice that it was there, but the Heritage Committee are really good at that, and they know what to look for. So they found on the beam the pièce de résistance, which is the signature of Henry W. Moyer, who built the house.
No.
He's on a beam, and actually I think I do have a photograph of it in the heritage book that the committee gave me. So you can see that. It's actually a little bit easier to see in a photograph than it is in person. So I'm sorry that technology has prevented me from showing that part, but it's a wonderful thing to just see his signature there. There's actually there's writing on another beam that I can't decipher at all, so maybe I'll get the Heritage Committee to come back and tell me if they can figure out what that one says. So I think that's as much as I would like to say, and I gather that I can ask for questions. Yes?
When was the house built?
About 1870. We don't know for sure, but around 1870. As close as we can get. Yes?
I know I written past it, but if I want to go drive past it, actually talk. Is it on Fly Road?
It's on Fly Road. It's 2 doors west of the corner store on the north side.
You know why it was built, like a merchant or a farm? Or
I assume it was built as a farmhouse. I don't believe it was ever used purposes, although Henry
a
Moyer.
merchant that lived there and worked nearby or something? You think it was
Henry
a farm?
Moyer originally was the first postmaster, and he was a tinsmith.
Okay.
So I don't know if the Heritage Committee knows either where his business was, but there was clearly a barn or something like that, kind of in the northwest of the house. You can see it they can just barely tell that it's there in the picture that's in the Old Boys Reunion. So I don't know if they farmed or not. It's not.
You'd be reasonably wealthy, wouldn't you be, to have a house like that in the 18th?
I don't know. I would think so, but he didn't pay for it all originally because there are records that he had a mortgage. Somebody named John Hansberger held the mortgage for quite a few years. I was going to tell you the names of previous owners, just because I have most of them. Henry W. Moyer was the original builder. His son-in-law was Alvin Moyer. So there were lots of Moyers in Camden, which used to be called Moyer's Corners before the post office came through. Alvin Moyer bought it in 1898. John Booth bought it in 1912. Anna Orth bought it in 1913. Jacob Moyer, I don't know if he must have been related in one way or another to the original Moyers. He bought it in 1927. John and Mabel Orth bought it in 1935. I don't know when Irving Moyer bought it, but anyway, he was another owner. And Edgar Nichols bought it in 1961 or 1966, that's not quite clear. And we bought it in 1975, no, 79, pardon me. And I'm looking at that, I'm thinking that as long as my health holds, I'm likely to become the person who's lived in that house the longest. It works for me.
You can come out the second door.
That's right.
Sorry.
Any other questions? I brought a few other artifacts. I left the bottles dirty just because they seemed more authentic, but you know, we find lots of stuff under the house, under the back room, in the ground. You know, I have a vegetable garden. Sometimes pieces of pottery turn up in the vegetable garden. And you know, the square nails that you would all be familiar with. And there's a metal M, which was under the house. I have no idea where that was, but surely that's a Moyer M. So feel free to have a look at the artifacts later on. Thank you.
Very much, and I'm not as tall. The Vintage House was built in approximately 1840 and has served as several private residences, a bunkhouse for itinerant workers during the harvest, and the home of the Jordan Historical Museum. It currently houses an Inn on the 20 suite and spa, and we're very pleased to have owner Helen Young with us here today, who will speak a bit about the colorful past and present of the Vintage House.
This great position of dominance makes me feel a little bit more comfortable talking to a room of people who probably know way more than I do about this. So if I say something that's a complete blooper and you know is way wrong, speak up, because I'm learning about the property as we go. As was said earlier, the Vintage House dates back to the 1840s. It was certainly built by 47. When exactly the building was done, I'm not sure. Newton Perry, who was a prominent stonemason, and I don't know whether one would call him an architect. I think he was, you know, a builder designer in those days. He designed and built the house. He was also the designer of St. John's Church, who I believe Brian's going to speak about later. And according to my resources, also the Ball House at Balls Falls, which is, you know, obviously a very handsome brother to our much smaller house. It was built on a lot formed, like all lots in Jordan, by a subdivision plan executed by Jacob Snur. And apart from one of my friends who's here being supportive, I'm assuming that you know something of the history of Jordan, everybody who's here. Would anybody like to hear? Yeah. Sure. Well, I don't have notes on it, so I'm going to speak extemporaneously, and so I can be corrected even more frequently. Jordan was a village that was never, I think, larger than, I have the number somewhere. It never grew beyond, I think, 39 homes. But in its day, I mean, 39 homes were a substantial sized village. And I'll find that number if someone's interested in it. But essentially, it grew at this end. This is Church Lane, and it grew to the south of Church Lane, essentially where the Jordan House is today, and where Avondale is now, which used to be the post office, as I understand it. And so when the Vintage House was built, it would have been separated actually by standing timber from the main part of the village, which seems so astounding now, but you know, was the case. And Jordan is where it is because there was shipping in the mouth of the 20-mile creek. And this was just along 21st Street, as I understand it, was essentially the sort of farthest reach for deep-hulled masted ships to come, and so there was a landing stage there. And so Jordan grew up around the sort of teamsters and shipping suppliers that would have congregated to service that harbor. As I'm sure many of you know, that harbor came to its end for two reasons. One was that it silted up. I mean, there was enough enough forestry taking place that erosion started to become an issue. And so it became less and less deep and less suitable for the ships that came up. But it also, most importantly, was cut off from masted navigation by the beginning of the Great Western Railroad, do you think, Brian? 1857? Something like that. In fact, Jacob Snoor sued the Great Western Railroad for loss of essentially his income from the deeper docks, and won. So there's no question, even in everybody's mind then, that the trains had killed off shipping. So that's sort of Jordan's potted history. Main Street used to be called Front Street and 19th Back Street. And it appeals to me, it's easy to remember. Maybe not, maybe you don't like that if you actually live on Back Street. It gives you a little bit of a second class status, I don't know. Anyway, at the time that the house was built, the lot was owned by Isaac Wismer. He also owned orchards down by the lake. And I have brought this. I mean, many enthusiasts will have seen this book already. I know there's a copy in the library. Rita Farrell owned this one. And I bought it from her daughter-in-law. Yeah, I think so. This is where our area is in the book, but it's well worth a flip through. It actually makes Grimsby look quite fabulous. There's a number of pictures of the, what do you call it, the Chautauqua sort of area of Grimsby in there, and it's pretty interesting. Anyway, yeah, so you can see Isaac Wismer's property down by the lake, adjacent to one of the creeks, and I'm in Umaret, so I can't remember the creek, but that way. When it was built, it looked a little different than it does today. I mean, I'm assuming everybody's seen it. I mean, is there a picture yet? I think, I have to admit that I was determined to get this house because I just loved it. I'm originally from England. My parents lived in an absolutely spectacular renovated mill. And so I have fixing things in my blood, and I love handsome houses. And I just thought, boy, if I could own any house, it would be this one, because it's just so lovely. But it didn't look like this when it was first built. There are two versions of what it looked like. One is that, in fact, it did look like that. The door was always on the south side, and you see it here. And the facade was always unencumbered by doors. And that comes from a man who very kindly gave us his doctoral thesis in which he studied Jordan. The other, quite frankly, the version that I think is more like true, is that it had two doors, much as your house did. In fact, you can see some brick repair that would suggest that actually that is the right story. And I would urge you to walk down there, and it's so close, you can go and sort of poke around. The entire first floor inside is now a spa, so there's no chance you're going to be looking in on someone's bedroom or anything like that. So you're very, very welcome to go and sort of snoop around. So